Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show. On Thursdays, as always, joined by one of my best friends, Duane Generalissimo Patterson of the Hugh Hewitt Show, master of the universe, HUGHNIVERSE.com, the troll-free web surfing experience for Hugh Hewitt fans and listeners. I was just on there last night, in fact, as I usually am on Wednesday nights with Duane, and doing, I don't know, is that show prep for the Ed Morrissey Show podcast? Is that what we do there?
Well, you see, I've been trying to fall into this pattern where at the end of the show, you know, I highlight what's coming up on Hot Air the next day and what you're going to be writing about, because you never know. You always just follow the news cycle. So I try to say I keep something in the tank, and I try to keep something aside and say, well, you know, if you're looking for something to write about, maybe you might have not heard about this, and I'll drop something on you. And last week was the first time I actually dropped something on you, and damned if I didn't go to hotair.com in the morning, and it was there.
It worked. Your project was complete. Worked. Yes.
So you know, the pressure was on to see if I could double dip. So last night I waited until the very end, asked you what you're going to write about. Oh, I don't know. and then I said, well, you know, if you're looking for ideas, there is somebody that's being nominated by Joe Biden for the Sentencing Commission. Now, this is not a judge. This is a policy board to oversee sentencing guidelines. And her name is Laura Maid. And I said, you might be interested to hear this little exchange, since the Democrats are all of a sudden trying to say, well, we're against crime too. Well, no, they're really not. You know, they don't show it. Here is one of Joe Biden's nominees with Josh Hawley of Missouri.
Which was actually a fine clip, too. It was a fine, interesting clip, and it will actually appear at Hot Air today.
Yeah. That's what you tell me. So here I am thinking, okay, I play this cut for Ed, and Ed says, well, that's actually a really good clip. I think I will write about that, share that clip with me. So I did. So I go to Hot Air this morning, and I'm thinking, I'm gonna read what Ed had to say about this. But no, we've got Grandpa from the Thanksgiving dinner table on with Jimmy Kimmel last night, displaying his Sundowners problem. It was awful to watch Joe Biden. It was embarrassing. If he didn't have the nuclear codes and weren't such a rotten person, you know, you'd feel bad for the guy.
Well, I'm not even sure I'd go that far. He's been a pretty much, well, you know what my opinion of it is.
He's been a disaster.
He's been a disaster for 50 years in Washington. There wasn't a single moment in Washington where Joe Biden wasn't a disaster. Robert Gates put it best. He's been wrong in every single foreign policy question that's ever come before him, and that's supposed to be his forte.
Ed Morrissey has put it bester by saying he is 20 pounds of manure in a 10-pound sack.
That's my opinion of him. It hasn't changed in decades, and I am sad to say that he keeps continuing to confirm this, especially last night on Jimmy Kimmel's.
should we give people, since you know we're talking about the run up to the J6 thing, and there's actually real.
We'll talk a little bit about that today. Yeah.
There's real important stuff to talk about today, and there's something really important that almost happened yesterday. That really is about the most important story of the day. But we wouldn't have known that watching Jimmy Kimmel last night. They didn't even bring it up.
Nope.
And this was 8 hours after it happened. Instead, we got this amazing bit of American, presidential rhetorical display from Joe Biden on with Jimmy Kimmel last night. The sentence, the paragraph, begins with Joe Biden trying to talk about his accomplishments. And, well, the sentence really never got finished because Jimmy Kimmel came in with the hook. Here is yeah, here's what that looked like.
No question. So there's a lot of major things we've done. But what we haven't done is we haven't been able to communicate it in a way that is
kidding.
Make me say another way.
Well, see, that's kind of perfect.
Say it in a communicative way.
Look how the press has changed. Mm-hmm. Look how the press has changed.
It has changed. Oh, listen, I get it.
I know you overstand it. Yeah. You don't just understand it, you overstand it. But here's the deal. one of the things is that it's very difficult now to have a
what,
even
Joe?
With notable exceptions, even the really good reporters, they have to get the number of clicks on the nightly news.
Clicks on the nightly news.
Question. Anyway, it just everything gets sensationalized in ways that. But I'm convinced we can get through this. We have to get through it. And one of the things, look.
I'm going to take a break, and then we'll talk a little bit more.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you.
Biracial commercials.
Now, we're going to get back to the biracial commercials comment in just a second because that's a whole other thing. But, you know, this is a guy who's complaining about the press who's refused to sit down to do one-on-one interviews with reporters to communicate whatever it is that the major things that he thinks he's accomplished.
Jimmy Kimmel ain't a reporter.
No, and it becomes really clear in the economics discussion that Jimmy Kimmel hasn't even bothered to read himself into that situation. But then again, Jimmy Kimmel's an entertainer. He's not a news guy. They went on a clown show. They spent months avoiding the press, at least in one-on-one interviews with friendly venues like, say, George Stephanopoulos and Chuck Todd and David Muir to do Jimmy Kimmel.
Here's the thing: the J6 thing. You know, the Dog and Pony Show begins tonight, and we learned this week who is producing the hearings.
Yeah, ABC's president.
ABC's president is doing this, and Joe Biden appeared on which network last night?
ABC.
ABC. You think that was just a coincidence?
No, of course it wasn't a coincidence. But just to get back to my point, do you know when the last time that Joe Biden sat down for a one-on-one interview with a reporter?
I do. 112 days ago.
Right, and you know what it was?
Lester Holt.
And you know what the venue was?
It was the Super Bowl.
It's the lame 5-minute Super Bowl interview thing that they do every year.
And he got testy because Lester Holt dared to ask him a question.
Right. Exactly. So they don't put him in front of people like Lester Holt anymore. It took them 4 months to figure out that they could put him in front of Jimmy Kimmel, and he can't even handle that. I mean, I'm not sure that there was one complete sentence in that entire clip you just played.
The Jimmy Kimmel thing was a payback for the ABC thing. If ABC was saying, well, if you want us to produce these hearings, you've got to give us an exclusive with the president on Good Morning America. And there was a negotiation back and forth. The White House says, well, we can't put him on that. He'll be awful. Okay, we'll put him on a Sunday show at Stephanopoulos. Well, we can't do that either. He can't handle it. Well, can we put him on with Kimmel? Well, sure. Nobody watches that.
And Kimmel's not going to ask him any tough questions. And Kimmel's trying to pull him out of the fire there because while Joe Biden's complaining that the press won't cover him properly while he's hiding from the press, he's also saying that he's also talking about the need to communicate better while he can't communicate. And Kimmel finally says, you know what, we're going to take a break. We're going to take a break.
And Joe Biden, when Kimmel says we're going to go to a break, Joe Biden says, I don't blame you. Did you hear at the very end? I don't blame you.
I don't blame. Well, yeah. I mean, I think it was more of a desperation move at that point. But
can we talk about biracial, Joe?
I was just about to say. I mean, this is that comment that Kimmel makes on the segue out about we're going to see a couple of biracial ads coming up next. That was not a Kimmel joke. That was a reference to something that Joe Biden said that. I mean, I'm still puzzling over to this very moment. Dwayne's got the clip. Go ahead and play that one, Dwayne.
Here it comes.
Joe Biden on Mad Men.
Oh, I'm serious. You turn on the TV, look at the ads. When's the last time you saw biracial couples on TV? When's the last time you saw the way, I mean, people are selling products. They do ads to sell products, and they sell products when they appeal to people. This generation is going to change everything. We just got to make sure we don't give up.
What the hell was that?
What? I mean, first off, I don't know if you've noticed this, Dwayne, but advertising for the last several years has heavily promoted biracial couples.
Yes.
Heavily so.
Very much so.
And it's clear that it's a strategy. And I I'm trying. I walked through it in my post this morning. It's like, this has been going on for a while, right? And it's probably because it polls well. I mean, I'm here to tell you that advertising is very scientific in its approaches to what images you put with what products. They do focus group testing. They do tons of research on this. And my guess is about 10 years ago or so, it came up that biracial couples are a pleasing image to Americans. Why? Because Americans don't really have problems with biracial couples. I don't even know what Joe's talking about. I mean, this is not the 1960s. It's not the 1950s. Americans are proud of the progress that they've made in racial relations. Biracial couples represent that. And I think what advertisers tumbled to a decade or more ago was that Americans feel better about themselves by seeing that on television. And so because they feel better about themselves, they associate very positive feelings to whatever brand is attached to those images. And so now I think you could probably look at television and try to pick out which ads don't have biracial images of some kind, because they're few and far between. And it's because it sells. I mean, it's popular.
I honestly, I don't get it. Is he trying to say that the entire Fifth Avenue, is he trying to say that the entire advertising industry is so racist? Is that what he's trying to claim?
Yeah, and he's talking about young people as though they're going to change the world when the world changed decades ago, and Grandpa Joe just doesn't know it yet. I mean, even in what we're talking about right now, with the last 10 years or so, as Madison Avenue has more or less commercialized these, biracial couples for advertising purposes, who's making those decisions? It's not teenagers. It's middle-aged people. It's middle-aged people in the advertising industry started doing it 10 years ago. Middle-aged people and older in corporations were sold on the idea 10 years ago or so. And the people who are buying the products are mostly middle-aged people who are very comfortable with these images. The change is here. It's done. It's over with. And Joe Biden's talking about this like he's still in 1962 Delaware, for crying out loud.
But again, to what point is he trying to make? What political point?
that we're still racist and that we're and that we have to wait for the next generation to save us from it, which is absurd. I don't know when the last time that he watched television was when My Mother the Car was on television. I mean, was that his last favorite TV show? Because that would be about the last time that, you'd have to worry about that kind of stuff. Maybe I don't know, maybe the Montefuscos? Welcome back. Oh, I know what it was. It was Carter Country. That was his last favorite TV show, was Carter Country in 1977. I think it was 1978.
And again, this coming from the guy that went on the Breakfast Club with Charlemagne the God, who was asking him legitimate questions about policy issues and saying, I'm not done with you yet. I still have questions for you. And Joe Biden says, well, if you're still not sure about whether you're going to vote for me yet, then you ain't black. This is the same guy.
Yep.
Before we leave this non-interview, I got to play one more clip. This is 7 seconds. This is 7 seconds long. Quick clip. But I don't want to pass the chance of playing this one. Here's Joe Biden last night.
Look, here's where we are. We have the fastest growing economy in the world. The world.
Except that our economy shrank 1.5% in Q1. The last metric we've got for it.
So if we're the fastest growing economy, every other economy in the world shrank by more than 1.4%.
Well, first off, I take exception to the word growing. Because when you're in negative territory, you're not growing. That's the definition of shrinking, actually.
See, no, I take your point, but what I'm saying is what possible metric can that be true?
It's not true under any metric. It's not true under any metric.
So he's lying his ass off.
He's lying his ass off. And this is what I was talking about. There's a longer clip of this. I think You can find it on the internet. It's about, I don't want to play it now. It's 2 minutes long. It's actually in my post at Hot Air, where he's talking about, oh, well, we've added 8.4 million jobs. No, we haven't. We've restored 8.4 million jobs.
We haven't added any.
We haven't added any jobs since the start of the pandemic. We're still about 900,000 jobs short of that number. And that's not even taking into account the number of jobs that should have been added through population growth. We're actually about 3 million jobs shy. Now, we're certainly recovering these jobs and doing so at a fairly decent clip, about 400K a month. It should be faster than that, but at least it's at 400K a month. But we're not creating jobs; we're recovering jobs. We are not expanding buying power. We're shrinking buying power. And when we talk about economy, Joe Biden is talking about the economy as though it's going gangbusters, while people in American households all over the place are starting to buy less. They're starting to look for cheaper brands. They're starting to cancel summer vacations. These people in America are not experiencing a growing economy.
I'm starting to think that Joe Biden is conflating the inflation number with the GDP number.
Well, I think that might very well be the case. Yes.
Well,
and they tried to argue last year. Remember that inflation is growth. Remember they were arguing that.
They sure did. And you know what? People all over the country, every time they go to put gas in their tank now. By the way, today, happy anniversary to all gas buyers out there. According to Gas Buddy, the threshold was passed. A nationwide average has passed $5 a gallon.
According to Gas Buddy, according to AAA, it's still a little bit below. I usually wait for EIA's statistics, which come out on a weekly basis, because that's the official measure. So I just like to stick with primary sources. But
the point being,
it was at 4.977 on Monday. It's clearly going to be over 5 by Monday. Yes,
it's gonna hit $6 by August.
Oh, easy. Yes. It might actually, at this rate, at this pace, it might actually hit $6 a gallon sometime in July, and still continue to go up from there. I don't know if you saw this. I don't have it in front of me at the moment, but the Washington Post, I think it's the Washington Post, has something that AAA, the number of calls to AAA's road service for people who've run out of gas is starting to skyrocket because people don't want to go to the gas station and fill up their tanks. So they're running on fumes.
So they're going gallon by gallon and calling AAA.
I guess so. I guess they're doing
wow. Wow, now that's
I'll write about that a little later. I'll write about that a little later on. That's a bad strategy, by the way. Especially if you live in cold weather states. You can get away with that in the summer, but if you live in places like Minnesota, where I used to live for 23 years, you never have less than a quarter tank of gas in the tank.
Cold weather
ever.
States. If you're in a warm weather state, if you're in California driving around the Southland and you're doing the gallon by gallon strategy, and all of a sudden you run out in Compton, that ain't kosher. Weather's got nothing to do with it.
Well, yeah, there's that too. But I'm just saying that
you'll break down and waiting for AAA. All of a sudden you'll be up on blocks.
Yep. Yeah, it'd be like driving around like the Bruce Willis's car in
yes.
Blind Date.
Yes, that's exactly
a crate
right.
there, no doors.
Absolutely.
All right, so now that we've got that out of the way, really quickly before we get to the J6 stuff, I don't know if you saw this, but Bernie Sanders apparently is telling everybody that Democrats are going to lose big, and what they really need to do is run against Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin.
Purify and then rebuild.
Yeah. Well, the problem is we only have 48 votes.
I endorse that strategy.
I love this strategy. This is a winning strategy for Republicans.
Yes, normally it's only the Republicans that deploy this strategy. Normally the Democrats don't stoop to that level, but I fully endorse this.
Yeah. This is Bernie Sanders still thinking that the emerging progressive majority is an actual thing. I don't know if he's seen the election results.
Chesa Bodine in the emerging progressive majority.
Karen Bass and the emerging progressive majority.
Yeah.
How does Karen Bass, who was on Joe Biden's VP shortlist, end up with only 37% of the vote in Los Angeles, while a billionaire Republican until yesterday candidate who's never run for office before ends up with 42% of the vote?
That happens. That happens because she wants to literally defund the LAPD. And Angelenos, after seeing runaway crime and homelessness everywhere, they're not totally down with that, actually, as it turns out.
Neither are San Franciscans. I mean, there was a article in the Atlantic. I really haven't had a chance to parse through completely, but there was a really good line in this. This is from a San Francisco, longtime San Francisco resident, I think a native San Franciscan actually, who's lived there since she must be my age. I'm guessing from when she was describing her childhood in San Francisco. And she says it was always strange, it was always weird, but in the last generation or so, you've got a bunch of basically performative activists LARPing as LARPing their ideology, which means live action role playing their ideology, rather than trying to make the city better for the people who live there.
Right.
And San Francisco voters are finally getting sick of it. And I think California voters are finally getting sick of it. This doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to start electing Republicans right and left in San Francisco, Los Angeles, or any other place. But the longer that Democrats cling to this idea that the emerging progressive majority is right around the corner, the more they're going to lose these elections, and the less that they're going to get in terms of progressive support, or support for progressives, I should say.
Totally agree. I mean, if you looked at the turnout from what happened yesterday, typical Democratic turnout was nowhere near what it normally is in California. It was a very, very depressed turnout, and in this state, I mean, hell, you could have early voted, at Christmas time. We've got such ridiculous voting here, and they still couldn't get Karen Bass still couldn't get a bunch of people to turn out for her.
Yep. By the way, while we're talking, we should mention this too, because we mentioned it last night. Ro Khanna, who is a House progressive Democrat, came out and said, maybe we should have
Ro Khanna.
Well, at least he's doing that much.
The weather vane of the House Democratic Caucus.
At least he's doing that much, Duane. He came out last night and said, maybe we should have passed that unanimous Senate bill protecting Supreme Court justices.
Gee, you think?
Jake Sherman, while we're talking here, Jake Sherman this morning is now saying the House Democratic leadership is heading towards passing John Cornyn's SCOTUS protection bill by unanimous consent as early as today.
Well, who could have seen that coming?
I am stunned. I'm stunned. It came out of nowhere, Duane, just kind of like the guy who wanted to assassinate Brett Kavanaugh.
Until yesterday, do you know what the Democrats wanted to put in that piece of legislation if they were going to bring it up?
My understanding was that they wanted to add language that would protect clerks and staff, but I think that there was more to it than that.
No, do you know what poison pill they wanted to put in there?
No.
They wanted to specifically ban protection for Ginny Thomas.
Jeez.
And dare Republicans to say no to it.
Yeah. That's classy. That's totally classy, isn't it?
That's really classy.
Super classy.
Ro Khanna is looking at that going, guys, we don't want to be held responsible, and we will be. We don't want to be held responsible if a justice gets whacked on our watch. I want to know where Chuck Schumer is today. Where the hell is Chuck Schumer?
Well, I don't know where he's at, but I'm going to tell you right now that he's probably not going to be anywhere near a podium when the House finally gets this thing passed by unanimous consent. I think he's going to try to stay way the hell away from this.
You think he'll be at the Resolute desk in a ceremony right next to Joe Biden when he signs it?
Nope. I think he's going to stay as far away from this as possible. He doesn't want to answer any questions, and I don't think there's going to be a Resolute desk ceremony.
I'm not thinking there's going to be one either.
Yeah.
I'm thinking it's going to be really quiet.
It's going to be made really, really quiet, and everybody's going to try to get their. Of course, Republicans will pounce. Duane, Republicans will pounce all over this.
You're damn right we're going to pounce on that
and they should. But Democrats are going to want to get this out of the way as quietly as they possibly can at this point, which is the reason why one of the things that Jake Sherman's reporting is that they wanted to add language for the clerks, but that deal fell through. Yeah, that deal fell through because everybody in the caucus is looking at this going, holy shit, we got to get this off our desks. Quickly.
Very quickly.
Very, very quickly.
It's amazing how weeks of inaction after a unanimous vote in the Senate. When's the last time the Senate voted unanimously on anything?
I mean, other than like a post office thing or to
nothing,
adjourn or something.
Right?
Yeah, nothing.
This was a true unanimous vote because, it makes sense. And Nancy Pelosi still held it up because she was just fine trying to squeeze Republican justices.
Well, and I think she's figuring out now that she's left her caucus looking pretty bad. And here's the thing. I think that if it came to doing that hearing tonight, the J6 hearing tonight, which we're going to get to here, we got a few minutes left, and not having this thing passed, Republicans were going to be all over that. I don't know about that because Republicans aren't even on this committee. You got two, and neither one of them might be inclined to do this. But you know that Republicans would be around that committee hearing, talking to reporters and getting on stand up saying, they're talking about something that happened 2 years ago. And now or a year and a half ago, and we're talking about protecting Supreme Court justices, and they're not doing anything about Supreme Court justices.
Legitimately,
right?
If you break down J6 to what they purportedly want to break this down to, it's that they want to go after Donald Trump for inciting a riot. I mean, that's what it boils down to, right?
Yep.
Okay. What's the difference between Donald Trump a year and a half ago inciting a riot and going through all this dog and pony show to prosecute him over it, congressionally speaking, to what Chuck Schumer said 2 years ago in front of the Supreme Court, literally calling out Gorsuch and Kavanaugh by name, saying, we're going to come after you and we're going to make you pay the price. You're going to reap the whirlwind for this.
Yep. There is.
What's the difference? How was Chuck Schumer not inciting a riot? How was Chuck Schumer not inciting domestic terrorism?
Well, that one was about a year ago, 2 years ago.
It was March of 2020.
The one in last month where Chuck Schumer, and you have that clip, we played it last.
That was May 10th. Yeah, that was May 10th.
That was exactly a month ago, where he says, I have no problem with people getting finding out where justices live and going to their houses.
Even though there's a law on the book.
18 U.S.C. 1507, which Merrick Garland refuses to enforce.
And refused to enforce last night.
Yeah, last night, even after this happened, they still didn't do anything about people who were showing up. Even though it's a criminal offense to do that,
after Merrick Garland held a press conference saying, well, obviously this behavior is unacceptable. Apparently it is, because they didn't go in and arrest people that still protested in front of Kavanaugh's house last night. In fact, I read a report that they were actually there this morning, still protesting out in front of his house. And Merrick Garland still was not going to arrest them.
Yeah, that's the reason why I put Merrick Garland's picture up on that post this morning. Is because he's the problem. You could end that nonsense in a heartbeat by simply arresting everybody that shows up, and then charging people who doxed the justices with the conspiracy to violate that 18 U.S.C. 1507.
If they ever find that clerk that leaked the decision, they should be charged as an accomplice in this too.
Well, I mean, that would be.
It's a reach. It's a reach. But if you want to do justice.
Yeah, but you know what the interesting part about that is that there actually isn't a law against leaking. I didn't know this. I didn't know this. There's no law against leaking Supreme Court materials. I think that there should be, and maybe there will be, but there apparently isn't a law against it.
Hugh had Tom Cotton on this morning, and Tom Cotton didn't mince any words at all. He really went after both Schumer and Merrick Garland, and he said Merrick Garland, because he didn't crack down on these protesters and is still allowing it, he needs to resign. He needs to get the hell out. Because he's not doing his job.
Yep. So, yep. I agree. All right. We got a couple minutes left.
That's about all it's worth.
J6 hearing tonight. I'm not watching it. I assume that anything that's newsy or substantive will be reported.
Grabian will pick it up. I mean, there will be something. You could not pay me to care about this.
Right. Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat.
And I am not a pro-Trump or an anti-Trump person. Where I'm at with Trump. I think
that this is an awful. I mean, I think that the January 6th riot was awful. I think that I don't think Trump bears legal responsibility, but I think he bears some moral responsibility for it. I think that the Republicans who tried to usurp state sovereignty in denying their electoral college votes.
It was a bad look all the way around.
All the way around.
Totally agree with you. I do not condone a bit of it. Anybody that broke into that Capitol and took part in that mob and took part of that riot should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And to be fair about that, they should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, not just set aside and held indefinitely without the due process.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, shouldn't have taken long to prosecute these guys.
No. So I'm a pox on everybody's house for playing politics with this whole thing.
Yep.
Get to the bottom of it and be done with it.
And this is not a get to the bottom. This is clearly
dog and pony
show. This is to try to drum up. This is try to change the polls.
If ABC News is building the set, conspiring with the House Democrats to do special video packages and everything to try and stick it in the prime time, I'm sorry, it's not serious. It's a rump committee. It has no legitimacy. I don't give two shits in a bucket about what comes out of this hearing. It's not going to matter.
Yep.
I'm sorry. Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney do not make this a bipartisan committee. They just don't.
No.
This is a never Trump committee.
It's and on a point that while Americans care about it, it's not part of their daily lived experience. It's not going to have any impact on what happens in November. Trump's not on the ticket in November.
$6.89 gas in the corner gas station in my parking lot is what people around here care about.
Shortages of baby formula are what people are going to care about.
That's what people care about.
Crime, having to be afraid to walk down the streets of your own community is what people are going to care about. That's what people care about. None of what they're doing right now on primetime tonight has anything to do with the issues that are plaguing Americans at the moment. And if they expect this dog and pony show to somehow change Americans' priorities, they're either idiots or they think Americans are idiots, because it's simply not going to happen. Now, if they have a case to make against somebody, then they should just go ahead and make the case. You don't need a primetime question and answer to do that. Just go ahead and make the case. Write the report. Refer it to the Department of Justice. Make the case.
I will close with this. If anybody thinks that this J6 committee is going to move the needle because it's going to be in prime time, whatever the news of today is, it's going to come in, and boy, after tonight, everybody's going to be talking about this tomorrow. Everybody tomorrow and leading into the weekend and the Sunday shows, everybody's going to be on the J6 thing. Do you know what gets released tomorrow, Ed?
The inflation report.
The CPI number comes out tomorrow.
CPI number comes out tomorrow.
You want to take a guess what the CPI number is going to be?
I'm going to say it's going to be 8%.
Do you know what the month-to-month CPI is going to be?
I'm not sure what the expectations are. I'm going to guess around 0.4.
No. From last month to this month? No.
You think it's going to be higher? Because of gas prices.
Every single day of May was an increase in gas prices.
No, you're right about that.
The month-to-month is probably going to be over 1%, which means the current pace. I'm not talking about last year, which had elevated prices. The year-to-year is one look, but if you look at the month-to-month tomorrow, it's going to be close to a full percent, if not maybe even a little more.
Interesting.
And if you annualize that, we're back at 12% current inflation.
Yep.
And when that number comes out tomorrow, do you think people are going to be saying, well, boy, that's terrible. But J6.
Yeah.
No one's going to say that.
No, nobody's going to care about J6 for more than a few hours. The next time they go to the gas station, J6 is not going to be on their mind. The next time they go to the grocery store, J6 is not going to be on their mind. The next time that they have to walk down a street in their community in the dark, J6 is most definitely not going to be on their minds. And if Democrats haven't figured that out after the Chesapeake recall and the George Gascon recall and the LA mayor race outcome yesterday, I'm not sure that it's going to sink in at all. I mean, even the national media outlets like New York Times, Washington Post finally did it in a news report today, by the way, about the messaging from the elections being a blow to Democrats on crime, which, by the way, I include in that post about Laura Mate.
Right.
So that's coming up. Well, by the time this airs, it will already be up at hotair.com. So, and then I also do throw a hat tip out to my buddy Duane. In that,
hey,
all right.
I had to try.
No, you did. It was a good try. If Joe Biden hadn't stepped all over you, man, it might have been the first thing I posted this morning. I was all prepared for it.
Grandpa Badfinger strikes again. I'm telling you, he's the 85-year-old grandpa that wants to tell you the same story for the 1,000th time at the Thanksgiving table, and you have to sit there and listen to it and pretend like it's the first time. That's a conversation with Joe Biden.
Yes.
Except that grandpa at the Thanksgiving table doesn't have the freaking nuclear codes.
Also, grandpa usually tells the same story over and over again, and it's true.
Based in reality.
Yeah, it's based in reality somewhere along the line. All right. We got to wrap up here, Duane, but what's coming up on tomorrow's Hugh Hewitt show?
Hugh spent almost all day on this on the reaction to this attempt on Brett Kavanaugh. And if the House actually moves today, that'll be an interesting thing to react. We're going to talk to Larry Arnn tomorrow about this and a bunch of other things. So that's going to be kind of the major focus. This really kind of bugged Hugh quite a bit yesterday, because if this attempt had gone through, this is a Republic destabilizing event. I mean, it really would have been.
Yep.
And we literally and figuratively dodged a bullet here.
Yep. I think you're right about that. All right. Well, that's on tomorrow's Hugh Hewitt show. We'll find out what's coming up then. 6 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 a.m. on God's time zone, 3 a.m. on the left coast. And don't forget to tune in the after show at the Universe. Now, tonight, are you going to be doing...
Just me.
Are you going to be doing live commentary on J6?
I am counter-programming the J6 thing because nobody's going to be watching it. So I will be doing a normal show in which I couldn't care about what goes on with the J6 thing. I will be doing the actual news tonight while the J6 thing is going on.
There you go. You can look forward to that if you're a member of the Universe, and you should be.
I expect a bigger audience tonight than I've ever had, because people are going to be saying, there's nothing on. I can't get away from this. Well, you can get away from it. Come into the Universe.
You should ask John Andrasik to come on with you. We haven't talked to John in a while.
We haven't talked to John in a while.
You should talk to John. See if he wants to come on with you tonight. Counter program.
That would be kind of interesting.
See, this is me. I'm the producer of the after show for.
I see. I Lord knows I need a producer.
All right, Duane Generalissimo Patterson, the best producer in the business, by the way. Don't let him fool you. He's the best producer in the business. Thanks so much for being with us, as always, sir.
Thanks, guys. See you.
All right, stay tuned for more from the Ed Morrissey Show coming up next. Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. And joining me now is one of my really good friends, on the air and off the air, Peter Grandich from petergrandich.com. Wrote the book Confessions of the Wall Street Whiz Kid, which you can read actually at petergrandich.com. You can also buy it, but you can read it online. And Peter has really recalculated all of his business orientation to providing faith-based investment advice, which for the most part these days is stay out of the markets, Peter. I mean, you're like a prophet of old, right? I think you're Jeremiah of the economy these days.
Well, yeah, it's first of all, it's not. People need to know it is not an open door action by tying your fate to finance. More doors
Yeah.
close automatically without even a chance to say boo because of that. But it is because of everything that's happened and explained in the book and then some. It is where I believe my rest of my natural life has to be focused on. And in terms of uh, prophecy, I wouldn't begin to think that I'm being used as a prophet. I can tell you that the actions that I took for myself and what I suggested people consider at the end of last year was not readily found. To basically say that America was in its worst ever economic, social, and political environment, and that you really shouldn't own any general equities or bonds was not a popular thing, nor did it derive a lot of new interest. It's probably a thing most people didn't want to hear. And even if they did, they said things like, I know you're right, but I hope you're wrong. And they stayed where they were at. So, yeah. And while we're now in this midst of what I said a couple of weeks ago was a normal bear market rally after the damage that was done, and that we have such a overwhelming amount of financial advisors with limited experience. The average length of a licensed financial advisor now is less than 12 years, which means they weren't even practicing what they preach when the last financial crisis was here. And so I'm not surprised that they have taken very lightly the fundamental social and political and economic factors that bear at least caution, if not outright alarm.
Well, and it's interesting too because you and I were on the air together on Relevant Radio last Friday, which was, I had a great 3-day run filling in for our good friend Drew Mariani, and it's a wonderful experience. You got me on the one day that we weren't having a ton of technical problems. These guys, Peter, worked their rear ends off because we had so many glitches going on, and those poor guys, the poor guys and gals in the studio, really, I mean, above and beyond. I wanted to assign medals to each one of them just to get us through the first 2 days. You were on the one day that we had it easy, and so we had a great conversation. And even then, we didn't get a chance to get to some of the remarks that were made, or some of the claims that were made about the current economy that simply does not comport to reality. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, it was mind-blowing to the point where I actually made a blog post just about the president and his claims that he made earlier in that morning was just befuddling. I felt I might have fallen asleep, and maybe I just dreamed the past couple of years, and because the statistics and numbers and what he tried to imply in his talk just didn't measure up to the realistic factors and known numbers that were out there. And sure enough, over the last few days, people have come out and to demonstrate and show particularly how wrong his statements were. But apparently statements and being wrong is not something the White House seems to worry a lot about. So, but it was shocking. And of course, the problem with that is there's not as many people taking it as serious as you and I do.
Right.
And therefore, people just accepted it. It's the president. He said it, so it must be true kind of an attitude. But the poll numbers, I think, have gotten to the point where people, even in the Democratic side, are coming out now. We're even watching clearly left-leaning or almost hard left broadcasters and all really attacking, how bad the economy is, and it's not anywhere near as the White House is trying to paint it as.
I'm going to get to the polls in a second because there's a really interesting one out of the Wall Street Journal. It was actually conducted a couple of weeks ago, but it was just reported on Monday. And I picked it up on, as we're talking, I picked it up on Tuesday, the same day that we're talking. But before we get to that poll, I want to ask you about how even inside the administration, it seems like people are trying to slough off blame. And I noticed this starting a couple of weeks ago, right? Janet Yellen pretty, now famously came out and said, well, we got it wrong on inflation. We missed the mark on inflation, and still tried to jolly along. Well, we're going to get this under control, which is clearly not the case. But for a couple of weeks prior to that, there were leaks around Yellen saying that she didn't want to go along with the that last tranche of stimulus that Biden did in March of 2021, and how she wasn't, her input in economic policy wasn't being listened to. And it really starts to sound in all of these things, all the things that she said and the stuff that's been said around her, like even inside the White House, they're starting to realize that this stinks and they're trying to find people to blame other than Joe Biden.
It reminds me like when you did something wrong when you were a kid and there was 3 or 4 of you around and your mother came and instead of admitting, you just point, Joey did it. It was Joey's fault. And that's really what the president has done here. He's pointed fingers at everybody. He's taken really no responsibility. It's not surprising. Listen, his entire, most of his career was that way as a senator and as a vice president.
Yep.
And let's face it, he's not the same man. Whether you like him or not, he's clearly not the same physical man that existed 10 or 20 years ago. And that probably is susceptible to more manipulation or forgetfulness or a combination of all of that plus lies. So I think Yellen is one of those people that have started to hear that. Not everybody's hearing it, but they hear that faint voice of abandon ship. Abandoned ship. And I really suspect that we're going to see other than the few that are there with long-term hopeful run for president or something, the secretary of transportation and maybe the vice president. I think we're going to see a wholesale bailing. The White House press secretary did. Her replacement is horribly compared. If I was a Democrat, it doesn't even come close to the last one that what she managed to do and get over on people. And so I just think this is a White House in free fall. And realistically, when you have nothing to point to, you just try to blame everybody else. And I think that's going to be their attitude until something changes.
Well, I think you're right, Peter. And, it's not necessarily unheard of that you have some house cleaning after a bad midterm cycle. And I think it's very clear that it's going to be an extremely bad midterm cycle. And Joe Biden will probably take some of the traditional methods of blame shifting by simply replacing some of the personnel around him. On the other hand, if it gets really bad, I'm not sure how many people are going to want to jump in there. And that brings me back to the poll here. I was sort of talking a little bit about the Wall Street Journal poll that was published on Monday, June the 6th. Now, this was taken in mid-May, so it took them a couple of weeks for some reason to get around to reporting on this. I mean, you read the Wall Street Journal, I read the Wall Street Journal. I think the Wall Street Journal, except for its real breaking news things and market things, I think a lot of times they're on Catholic time, Peter. I mean, they really take their time with stuff. They're good, but they really take their time with stuff, right?
Yeah, well, sometimes I just think, maybe, especially when we see now in this media world where everything is instantaneous and so much errors have occurred because of instantaneous.
Yep.
Maybe that we should all go back to, Catholic time.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And I'm going to get to more media stuff later about that because I think you're absolutely right. But anyway, this Wall Street Journal poll was very interesting. They weren't really asking the electoral questions in this. It's really just about the economy and some other issues. There were other issues that were involved in this. There was some numbers on abortion that came out early on this. They kind of leaked those out early to stoke interest in this. I didn't find them to be terribly different than previous polling numbers on abortion, and it's clear that abortion isn't really going to be a major issue in the election. But what I did find extremely interesting were two things. One is that 83% of respondents in this poll were pessimistic, either to a large degree or a lesser degree, about the current state of the economy. And this was in a poll sample that was comprised of 48% Democrats and Democrat-leaning independents. 48%, half of the poll respondents, almost half, were Democrats or Democrat-leaners, and 83% were pessimistic about the direction that the economy was going. There was, I think it was 63%, I can take a really quick look here, Peter, of people who were saying that they are not optimistic about improving their standard of living, their standard of living for the next year. Now, that is 27%, right? That was a 20-point drop from last year. The biggest drop they've ever had in that particular measure, because they've been doing this poll since 1972. And the share of respondents that said that their financial situation has gotten worse over the last few years, it says few years, so got to be careful about that, is 38%. That is the highest it's been since the Great Recession in 2007, 2008. Peter, you talk about the media being asleep, but I think everybody else is now wide awake as to just how bad things are.
Yeah, take away a couple of the financial networks, which are really just places for what I call the "don't worry, be happy" crowd to peddle their wares. I don't believe they give balanced information. But you're right, much of the media also has not really focused on how really bad it's been for most. Listen, for the last couple of years, you and I have talked, even when the market was going up, we talked that it was really thanks to the monetary heroin that the Fed was providing, trillions of dollars being created out of thin air. But we knew that it was a very small percentage of Americans were prospering from that. The rest were struggling to stay afloat, and a lot were falling. And of course, the pandemic and the psychological damage and struggles that people had with the pandemic, let alone the actual physical and monetary and all the other things that impacted. I guess as that started to wane this year, there was just a natural human tendency to want to hope that the worst is behind us. And then what happens to the average American? Boom. Gas is going up twice as much. Food is going up, not 3, 4, or 5%, but 15, 20, 30. Whatever business you have, you're having trouble first getting help, then you have trouble getting parts or whatever it is that used to take 3 weeks to get to your place of business. Now they're telling you it could take 3 or 6 months. And all of this is happening while statistically 64% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 25% of Americans making over $250,000 are living paycheck to paycheck, which, if you think about that, is crazy, except that you and I have had this talk that people, live beyond their means. And I've always argued less is more and all that type of stuff. So it's been one thing after another. And for the lion's share, which it looks like the Wall Street Journal didn't make those polling exclusive to Beverly Hills and the Hamptons. They polled average Americans, and average Americans are facing an extremely uphill battle. And right now, for a few months, they've been able to get away with it by charging it. We're seeing that now. We're seeing how much balances are going up on credit cards. But that'll reach a level because there's going to get to limits where you can only charge so much. And it's understandable that pessimism is there. And it's even more deserving if you look to the long-term fundamentals, the things that you and I have spoken about and what led to me taking such a dire position by the end of last year. So the poll doesn't really surprise me yet. And again, I always like to say, I wish I was wrong, but I feel I'm going to be right.
Well, I think you are. I think you're already being proven right. I mean, and again, we talked about this on Friday. In terms of inflation, I find it interesting, too, that I think that the media is starting to figure out that, the cat's out of the bag on what happens in inflation. The Associated Press had a very good report by Christopher Rugaber, who is actually one of their better reporters on economics, talking about the regressive impact that inflation has had in America, that this is mostly being borne by working class people and poorer people, and that you can tell that in how people spend. Now, you and I have talked about consumer spending, that first off, we probably spend too much on stuff we don't need. So that's one thing. And that's, of course, gets back into your faith-based approach to, financial planning, which is, if you're renting a storage unit to keep your stuff and you own your own house, you probably have bought too much stuff and need to stop doing that. But even with what's called personal consumable expenditures, PCEs, if you're looking at the reports, Peter, first off, they're not spectacularly. This is not spectacular growth. It was 2.5% in Q4 last year, 3.1% I think is the latest iteration of that in Q1. But it's where the money is going and who's spending it. And the Associated Press broke it down very nicely. And again, I believe this was either Sunday or Monday, in showing that the people who are wealthy are still buying luxury items. They're still going to the fancy stores. You know, Nordstrom's sales are up, for instance. And there was Nordstrom's, there was another one where sales were up. And in the meantime, Walmart and Target and other discounters are reporting that their customers are scaling down. They're spending less per visit, and they're also looking for cheaper alternatives to what they used to buy before. So all of a sudden, generics are there's an uptick in sales of generics. There's a downward pressure on the sales of name brands in these stores. And it's clear that, as Heather Long put it in the Washington Post, and this is a couple of weeks ago, she's also ahead of the curve on this, that we're developing an economy of haves and have-nots. And that's exactly what inflation does. It creates this stratification.
Well, again, and that played into a role of my decisions on things that I made. But let's go back just a year ago. And first, there really wasn't no inflation. That was the argument we heard from the Fed and the president. Then this wonderful word that came out that I don't remember in all my years, 38 years, but it floated for a while and it seemed to work for them, transitory. It's transitory. And of course, now we've seen real inflation. One of the things that's interesting, two things that aren't discussed a lot, and we should bring this out for your viewers and, of course, the people that I will play this for. One, the CPI is not the best indicator of inflation. And the reason it isn't, it's heavily weighted on measuring luxury items, not necessity items. And like you said, there's not as much inflation, nor is it impacting as much the people that can afford to buy the stuff. The old story is if you could own that speedboat, you're not going to worry about what the actual price of the gas is, okay? Where, you know, we just talked about how most people are just living paycheck to paycheck. But the thing that isn't talked about much at all, and it's so widespread now, more widespread than any other time, including in the 70s, is what we call shrinkage. And we're not talking about the Seinfeld shrinkage. We're talking about where companies now are widespread either shrinking the package, shrinking the amount of the package, or in other words, it used to be 50 pieces or whatever it was for $1.50. Now it's 47 for $1.50, or they shrunk the amount of ounces or the size. And the net result is there's no real way of measuring that. But if you think about it, all those things are a necessity. If they're shrinking the amount that you're getting and either charge you more or the same, the net result is you have to pay more for the very same thing you used just a while ago. And they don't take that into account. And it's all over. People have talked, people even notice it. Some have been so bold that you can actually see it in the difference of the bags. But most look, it used to be net weight 6 ounces. Now it's net weight 4.5 ounces. So there are so many things that have made up, and very few people, there were an odd person or two, Ed, but very few talked during the lockdown on either side of the aisle. Hey, when these lockdowns end, now that we stop making all this stuff, people are going to need stuff, and it's not going to be readily available. And one of the classics to inflation is too much money chasing too few products. And that's the other thing. And then the other unforeseen things, China holding back. Listen, Ed, it wasn't until the pandemic that most of us, me included, realized how many things that we need in everyday life were not being made here in the USA. And we were dependent on coming from overseas, and particularly from areas now that aren't the best of friends of ours, or outright are clearly not friends of ours. And all of that has played a role in causing, and once inflation is out of the genie's out of the bottle, Volcker proved that unless you absolutely destroy demand and literally force a hard recession or a depression, it's hard to break its back. So these guys that are out there, and gals, from the Fed saying, oh, by the second half and no later than 2023, inflation will be back at 2 or 3%. Let me remind you, those are some of the same people that worked at the place where just less than a year ago, we found several Federal Reserve Board members were trading their own stock brokerage account while they were federal board members. And I got to tell you, Ed, if I was on the Fed and I knew we weren't tightening, I'd be long stocks too. So I don't really have a lot of trust or faith in the Fed to begin with. I have even less now. And now we find all these politicians, again on both sides of the aisle, Ed, are trading and being involved in stocks and all at a time when they're making decisions that will directly impact those companies and all. There's a whole lot of issues, social, politically, and economically, that just drive me to say that the worst has not been seen. We're going to have to go through a much more difficult time over a far longer period than I think most people are used to or even aware needs to happen.
Well, yes, to all of that. I mean, you covered it really well. And I think that especially the part where it's both parties. I was talking with somebody about this, and I forget who it was. And we were talking about monetary expansion, and we were talking about debt. And I said neither party has been serious about this since about 1994. And I think this is the last time anybody even had a serious conversation about balancing the budget and cutting out deficit spending. And maybe for a year. And even then it was sort of they had the balanced budget, that one balanced budget that passed. I think it was 1995's budget or 1996's budget. And even then it was kind of gimmicky, but at least it came close. It was a lot closer than we've come to since then. And yeah, nobody's taking this seriously. And so it's, when we're talking about massive monetary expansions, I think the Federal Reserve has plenty of blame that should be tagged onto it. But we also have to note that both parties in Congress and both parties in the executive have basically required the Federal Reserve to keep coming up with more cash because they keep spending budgets with, appropriating money that doesn't exist. They got $1 trillion deficits. Where do people think that money comes from? Yeah, it comes from selling bonds, but bonds are basically a form of monetary expansion. And I don't think that most people really kind of understand that, especially because I don't think most people expect that any of those loans are ever going to get repaid.
I don't think a lot of people on the lower to middle level of financial service industry understand it as well, to tell you the real honest truth that
yeah.
And the carefree attitude that they have to understand. Listen, I'm in this 38 years. When I entered this business, America was the world's largest creditor nation. So when Volcker had to do what he did back in the late 70s, he did it with a cushion without really any major deficits, okay? And he did it from a period of time also when we were a lot better off geopolitically around the world than we are now. And so it's going to be a much bigger challenge to do that. But, we go through this debt cycle, every year we go, are they going to sign the debt limit? Are they going to shut the government? And then they put the can is kicked and it's kicked and it's kicked. Well, here's the bottom line. We're now over 30 trillion. I still find this hard to say it because we never used the word trillion in the early days of my business. 30 trillion in hard debt. You and I have had this conversation. That doesn't even count Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, which people are expecting to be paid over the next several years, where there's not any money sitting somewhere that's just going to be used to pay that. Let's just look at the 30 trillion. And let's just say that this interest rate argument only gets to 5%. It doesn't go back to the 15 or 20% that you and I remembered.
Oh, yes, we do. Yep.
Okay. So 5%. So 5% interest, 30 trillion, 1.5 trillion in interest expense. Hey, the best year we ever had was 2019. We took in a little under $3.3 trillion as a government. That means half of our expense is going to go just to pay off the interest expense.
Yep.
So I don't know how you could have that. And think about this. No one was thinking of this when interest rates were down at 1 or 2% the last couple of years. And when paper came out to float, we issued treasury bills and notes instead of issuing 30-year bonds at 1 or 2%. We don't even are smart enough to use low interest rates to our advantageous way. So there's a big nut to pay. Less and less people are in a position to pay it. And it is an old, thing that went around when Romney ran for president about that man that did the pulling the wagon, that, more and more people are getting in the wagon and they're really hammering those of us that are still able to pull the wagon. And eventually the people that are pulling the wagon go, I want to jump in there too. And we cannot continue. It's just monetarily, financially, and quite frankly, spiritually wrong to continue going at this rate, because some of us who are advanced in age, like myself, But our children and certainly our grandchildren are going to pay a horrible price for this mismanagement, which you just brought up, has really made no movement to fix it at all for over 20-something years from either side of the aisle.
And nearly 30 years. Nearly 30 years. Yeah. All right, Peter. I'm gonna change subjects here just in the last couple of minutes, because you and I talked about something just briefly before we came on the air, and it's going to give me an opportunity to mention that you have the absolute best credibility bookshelf behind you, and that is not a picture, folks. That is not a Zoom background. That's actually Peter's bookshelf, and it's awesome. It's got all sorts of great memorabilia in there in sports, and we were talking a little bit about, you know, the lack of what's the right word for it? The lack of respect for individual choice when it comes to political and cultural matters, right? The Tampa Bay Rays, right? That had a patch. Most of them had a patch on their uniform celebrating LGBTQIA plus whatever it is month, right? LGBT month, Pride Month, I guess is what it's called. And of course, it was, you know, the rainbow flag. I think it was the logo, the team logo, but with the rainbow colors on it. And there were a handful of players that opted not to wear it. They didn't make a big deal about it. They didn't protest. It wasn't a protest. They just opted not to wear it. And of course, people got irate because a few people just didn't want to go along with, you know, wearing the rainbow emblem because they felt it conflicted with their religious beliefs. NBC News over the weekend, and they plugged it every day since, ran this piece about how a speaker at a high school commencement recommended a biblical approach to marriage, which was an odd thing to recommend. I got to say, it's an odd thing to recommend anyway, but they called it hate speech. And he didn't say don't be gay. He didn't say, you know, gays are going to burn in hell or anything else like that. He just said that when you select a spouse, you should keep biblical principles in mind, and men should choose women, women should choose men, which certainly is a mainstream thought, not just in America, but around the world, as well as tolerance for people who choose otherwise. But, this is not about tolerance. This is about indoctrination, and it's about browbeating people until they not just, allow other people to have opinions, but make everybody bend the knee to a certain opinion. And I know you've been very involved in sports, and so this was a story that you were following. I want to give you an opportunity to express your opinions on what happened with these 6 or 7 players on the Tampa Bay team.
So what you always like to comment about my bookcase, that's what's left of a 20-year business that was a very viable and lucrative business, I may add, dealing with professional athletes, both with their finances and from Catholic Christian sports ministry work. 13 years with the New York Giants on a regular basis, part-time with the New York Yankees. I left that at the end of 2020 and early 2021 because what sports, particularly at the NFL and of course the NBA, which I was never really involved with, has decided for their best interest to embrace social and political arguments that contrared my personal faith. And so the only choice I had was to swallow that for the almighty dollar or walk away from it. So I walked away from it, and what's left of it is right behind me. That's the extent of it. But I took particular interest in this article, and it's widespread, and it's part of a bigger picture. It is really the attempt of a beating down, and I believe it's demonic forces, to be blunt, that are trying to silence and bring it to the point where anything expressed that normally our parents or grandparents got to express without fear of being hammered, since it was just an opinion about their faith, is now becoming extremely difficult, challenging at the least, and at the point to where people like these players, particularly the ones that actually gave quotes and stated that, hey, I'm a Christian, I believe it goes against my godly teachings, I pray for them, I love them, I'm not going to hinder them in any way, I just can't openly support it. And those are the people that are attacking the most. And it's happening everywhere. It's not just happening in sports. It's happening in offices. It's happening in all areas. And of course, it's supported by a media that's dominant in that way of thinking. And I think it's only going to get worse. And, it's funny, I'll just add, I had an opportunity given to me again to go back and do Bible study and chapel with a couple of teams. And this is part of the reason, again, that made me turn it down, because I think that is going to be more persecution. And I'm better served in this limited voice I have from an economic standpoint. I really had no voice really at any time in the sports world. And it's sad. I have a friend, I won't even tell what league it's in, but he's very high up. He's a devout Protestant, and he's at the point now where he says, I have to leave, even though it's going to cause me financial hardship, because wokeism, I guess that's how you say it, wokeism.
Sure, yeah.
Wokeism is everyday life in that professional sports, and I can't deal with it anymore. So he has to make a very tough choice and figure out a way to support a wife and daughter, because he'll never make the type of income he makes now by working for that professional league. So,
yeah, I mean, we went from tolerance to forced cheering in a very, very short period of time on a whole range of subjects. And we could spend a lot more time on this topic, but I'm going to let you go, but not before we find out more about petergrandich.com and what you're doing these days, and how potential clients or just friends can reach out and get in touch with you.
Well, Ed, I'm in the advanced stage of my twilight in my career. I've even talked to my friends and followers who still read I don't do really any social media anymore. I mean, we do put up an occasional video on YouTube if I'm interviewed somewheres and all, but I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on Instagram. I do have a blog. People can read that, and they can give an email, and anytime we post on the blog, they'll get that posting. I put the April 2024 out as a date because I'll be 68 and 40 years in the business. And then if the good Lord has me to that point, I'll make a decision then on a yearly basis. But I really do think that what's ever left of my natural life is to speak about the things that most people on Wall Street wouldn't begin to speak about. And trust me, it is very, very hard to find a faith-driven, open faith-driven matters of finance topic or persons or groups. Yet, whether Protestant or Catholic, our Holy Bible has more about matters of finance than it does even about heaven or hell or praying. So the good Lord thought it was important to tie our faith and matters of finance, but unfortunately, most in the industry don't. And that's where I feel I separate myself, and hopefully will be around long enough to impact, some people to see that, because without our faith and without following the Lord's way, I think we're just susceptible to all sorts of troubles financially and otherwise. So again, that's really what petergrandich.com is all about.
petergrandich.com, that's where you can go. You can find him here on a fairly regular basis. I've been remiss in getting Peter on a little bit more often but we're going to fix that. And of course, you can go to relevantradio.com, and he's a regular on the Drew Mariani show. Sometimes when I'm filling in, most often when Drew's there, and he's always on top of the latest developments. He's great at taking calls there too, by the way. And when we have time to do that on relevantradio.com. Peter, thanks so much for being here today, man.
Well, Ed, I'll just tell you, I missed it when you used to do it from your restaurant bar that I used to see in the back. It was more enjoyable. But I have to look at not only you live, but I got to look at this picture over here on the right of you.
It's all branding, man. It's all branding. Yeah.
Take care, Eddie. Thank you for being, it's not easy being a person from our side of views these days. And, when you're one of the few voices and one of the only few people that I wish to speak to. So keep up the good work, buddy.
All right. Well, you do the same, Peter. God bless you. Thank you so much for being with us. Stay tuned, folks. We'll be back with more from the Ed Morrissey Show right after this. Thanks for tuning in to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast edition. If you liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe at each of the different platforms. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Rumble, we're on YouTube, and we're at the Town Hall Media Player, so be sure to subscribe. Subscriptions are important. Really do appreciate that. It's free. Be sure to like the video if you like that as well. We want to get the word out as much as we possibly can. Really want to thank you for being with us, and while you're at it, if you're at any one of the Town Hall websites, especially hotair.com, be sure to subscribe to our VIP program, or our VIP Gold program, which has extra benefits for our subscribers. That is a paid subscription service, but that money goes to fund important initiatives such as Julio Rosas's on-the-road journalism, first-person journalism, journalism you can trust from the border, from the unrest in cities, and all other sorts of things. We do all sorts of fun things with our VIP Gold subscription members, including our VIP Gold chat that I do with Cam Edwards on Wednesday afternoons. Cam Edwards from BearingArms.com. Each of our sites have their own live chat editions and their own streaming shows for VIP Gold members. So be sure to subscribe to the Hot Air VIP Gold, which goes across the entire Town Hall media spectrum, and especially to the Ed Morrissey Show podcasts. We really appreciate it. Thank you for watching.